What's up, everyone? It's Ryan coming to you again tonight on Thursday with a preview and prediction of the top 10 matchup between the Ole Miss Rebels, number 5 ranked in the country, and the number 9 ranked in the country, University of Georgia Bulldogs, coming up this Saturday at 3:30 at Sanford Stadium. Game day is going to be there. Can't get much bigger atmosphere than that. Can't get much bigger game than this coming up this week. Got a 6-0 Ole Miss coming in to face 5-1 Georgia. Ole Miss playing with a little bit of house money. They take one loss and it doesn't really derail their season. And Georgia playing a tough, hard-fought, late-night victory in Auburn last week, up against a top 5 opponent this week. At least we get them at home, but another huge test for the Georgia Bulldogs. And I said in our last video last week that I would feel a lot better about our season if we were able to get through last week and this week unscathed. Having that one loss already against Bama really kind of makes it, if you are one that hopes to play in the SEC championship game, kind of makes it imperative to at least win out in the SEC going forward. I know you have Charlotte later on, which obviously shouldn't be any kind of test, and then you end the regular season with Georgia Tech, which they more than likely will be coming in undefeated into that game. So, if you are someone that's looking forward to Georgia playing in the SEC championship game, that's fine. You really need us to win out and have some other things happen. You have a few teams, Texas A&M, that's undefeated. Ole Miss, of course, is undefeated, but if we beat them, that would give them a loss and give us an edge in the tiebreaker, however that plays out against them. But then you have just Alabama's undefeated in the SEC currently, and we already know that we're down to them in the tiebreaker. They play Tennessee this weekend, so tough matchup for them. See how that shakes out. We already have the edge over Tennessee there, but they have LSU with only one loss right now, Oklahoma with only one loss right now, so still a lot of season left. Obviously, a lot of things to shake out. It's going to be crazy to see how many tiebreakers they have to go down the line for. But all that being said, we still have Ole Miss, we still have Florida, we still have Mississippi State, we still have Texas on the schedule in the SEC. So tough tests down the road, and it starts this Saturday. And if you're like me and are not a fan of playing in the SEC championship game anymore, and that was even prior to what happened in last year's SEC championship game when we lost our quarterback and our punter, I kind of view this game, the SEC championship game that is, as a pointless exercise these days. It's all about getting in the playoffs. And if you have to go out the week after Thanksgiving and play, what this year and previous years would be a ninth SEC championship, a ninth SEC game in a championship type atmosphere, where everyone's going all out and just pounding on each other for another week instead of getting to sit at home and rest up. And say you're a 1 or 2 loss team, probably going to be in the playoffs, probably going to be playing a home playoff game against a team that's maybe ranked 9th, 10th, or 11th potentially even. I personally would much rather sit at home and watch 2 other SEC teams duke it out and beat each other up for 4 quarters while we rest up and get ready for a home playoff game. So, but with that being said, if we fall to Ole Miss Saturday, then that's, SEC championship game's probably out of the question then. But at the same time, looking down the road, again, you have Texas, you have Georgia Tech, and I touched on, what I feel like might happen in that Georgia Tech game if they come in undefeated. They have a tough test against Duke this weekend themselves. I think they're actually the underdog in that game, which is a little surprising. But, you know, that game is going to mean the most it's meant in many years this year. Whether Georgia has 1 loss or 2 losses, or Tech has 0 losses or 1 loss, it's gonna be huge. So if we're sitting in, a spot where we have 2 losses going into that game, then we're fighting for our playoff berth at that point. And to me, obviously, to anyone these days, that's all that really matters. And so, anyway, getting back to the Ole Miss game this week, huge test. We went there last year, obviously did not handle that situation well at all. Just never really had much fight in that game. It was never really close. We lead the all-time series. I know back when there were divisions, Ole Miss was in the West, we were in the East, so didn't play a ton of times. We currently lead the overall series with 33 wins and 14 losses. There's been a couple times in the history where Ole Miss has beaten us twice in a row. Obviously, with them having only 14 wins, it hasn't happened a ton, but it has happened a few times, so we're trying to avoid that happening again. And one thing that kind of sticks out to me, going into the 7th game of the season, this is going to be just the second time that Ole Miss has gone on the road. And the other time they went on the road was to Kentucky in week 2 when Trinidad Chambliss wasn't even quarterbacking. It was Austin Simmons' team that week. But they went to Kentucky, and we all know Kentucky's struggling, kind of at the bottom of the barrel as far as SEC is concerned. And Ole Miss went in as heavy favorites. They won the game, obviously, because they're undefeated, but it was just 30-23. And Simmons did not look good in that game. Like I said, Chambliss did not play. And Simmons hasn't played since. Now, I know Simmons got an injury, but if I was a betting man, I know Trinidad Chambliss is a senior, but if he can muster up another, another year of eligibility, that's the word I'm looking for, at least, I could certainly see Austin Simmons playing in a different uniform next year, just with, the way that the college world is right now. Those guys will not sit behind anyone and wait. And Chambliss has looked really good in his 4 games of action as the starting quarterback for Ole Miss. It's hard to argue that he is not the focus of that offense, whether it's passing, obviously, as the quarterback, or rushing the ball. He's already thrown for almost 1,300 yards. He's only thrown 1 interception, as opposed, and just 7 touchdowns. He rushes the ball. He's already run 60-something times, and just obviously, your quarterback's touching the ball every play, so the offense is going to run through him, but he is the definition of a dual threat quarterback. He'll be the toughest dual threat quarterback that we've faced yet all year, and could be, the toughest one we face all year. And I know Haynes King looms large at the end of the season there, but Chambliss has shown that he is legit. And one thing I'm going to be interested in maybe tallying up on Saturday is how many times they mentioned that he came from Ferris State, which I had to look up where Ferris State even was. If you don't know, it's in Michigan. So, but obviously a great find by Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin and the crew there to bring him to Ole Miss. He still, originally didn't beat out Austin Simmons, but he has certainly made the most of his opportunity, and he's going to be looking to come into Athens for his first true road test, and I won't say shock the world, but continue to turn heads and make a case for him being in the Heisman conversation, frankly. If he, I'm not sure where he stacks up as far as the odds go, but if he's not already been talked about in that breath, then if he goes into Athens on Saturday and puts up similar numbers like he has in his first 3 games, 300 plus yards passing, averaging around 70 something yards rushing a game, then it's going to open up a lot of eyes. And so Georgia's going to have their hands full. They as in Ole Miss, are a little bit like Georgia in the sense that they like to establish the run. Now Georgia does it with 4 or 5 different guys. Ole Miss primarily does it with Chambliss and Lacey, but 2 obviously very capable runners for Ole Miss. They each average 4.6 to 4.7 yards per carry. Lacey's already well over 500 yards, over 120 touches. So really the workhorse on this team for Ole Miss. But, as I mentioned, Chambliss has got it done through the air too. They spurred it out. And that's where they are going to look to attack Georgia, just with the fact that they have 5 different receivers that are already over 200 yards, with 3 of those guys over 300 yards on the year receiving. So a lot to try to, cover, keep up with. And we know about our struggles kind of on the back end. Now, granted, I will say the likes of Robinson has, kind of stepped their game up the past couple of weeks. So growing, getting better, which is good. It's what you want to see. He's still young. But the back end has kind of shored itself up a little bit, in the second half. We'd, of course, like to see that same type of production in the first half. But if we can give me 3 quarters this week, then I'll be happy. I won't ask for 4. I don't want to get too greedy. But anyway, so have some stats here I'll kind of continue to go over. Georgia comes in as, I won't say a heavy favorite, but it's kind of surprisingly, they're currently 7.5 point favorite. And the over-under on this game is 55.5, which I can go ahead and tell you without telling you what I predict the score to be. My prediction is going to be under that. So, but going into this season, I, always going into any season, try to think, hey, realistically these days, someone going undefeated is going to be very hard to do, especially in the SEC, just with the parity in the league and just with the schedules and just the grind. It's, very hard for any team, whether it's SEC, Big 10, Big 12, whatever, to go undefeated. So I start thinking, well, where's the losses going to come, right? Last year, I predicted us to lose 2 games in the regular season. And last year, Ole Miss was one of them. I just didn't like where it was on the schedule, and just knew their defensive line was kind of stacked last year, and was just really worried about that game. I ended up being right. And my other guess last year was losing at Texas, but we all know what happened there. So this year, kind of looking at the schedule, and in my mind, I'm like, well, Ole Miss lost some stuff on the defensive line, and we're going to get them at home. I kind of half jokingly, at the beginning of the season said we were going to lose to Alabama. But, kind of as time went on, I kind of started believing in Georgia a little bit more than I obviously should have. But, when that happened, it's like, well, gosh, now it's like, do I want to predict a loss to Ole Miss? Because, now we're sitting with 2 losses now. Not that really matters. Like, you could get your first 2 losses, first 2 games of the season, and then go undefeated after that. Highly unlikely, but it could happen. So really doesn't matter where it comes, but I just think looking down the road, the tougher matchup out of what we have left in my mind right now is Georgia Tech. But at the same time, I'm like, man, it's almost like I want to predict Ole Miss to beat Georgia this weekend. So I was like, well, let me look at some stats, kind of see if I can talk myself into it one way or the other. And so, currently Ole Miss compared to Georgia is fourth in the SEC in scoring points. They're averaging 38 a game. Georgia's ninth and scoring 32 points a game. So about a touchdown difference there. And Ole Miss has played, as I mentioned, Kentucky like Georgia has. But they've also played Arkansas. They've played Washington State. They've played, a little bit lesser opponents. They played Georgia State, scored, I think, 66 against them. So that kind of, misconstrued their points per game total just a little bit. But at the same time, too, Georgia ranks fifth in the SEC in points given up on defense at 17. Ole Miss has only given up 19 points a game. Now, I know that ranks them ninth in the SEC, but it's just a 2-point difference. So, obviously, they have some guys on that side of the ball that can come up with stops. And again, you look at kind of individual games. They gave up 23 to Kentucky. They gave up 35 to Arkansas. Gave up 19 to LSU. And then gave up 21 this past week to Washington State. I don't want to read too much into that Washington State game last week, by the way. Classic letdown look-ahead game. Lane even admitted so without obviously coming right out and saying it. But he did mention that they had spent a lot of their extra time for having the bye week on, the bye week they had before Washington State. They'd spent a lot of their extra time on Georgia and almost treating Washington State a little bit as an afterthought, and it almost came back to bite them. But I personally, for one, am glad that it didn't. I'd much rather them come in 6-0, riding high, feeling good, instead of, pissed off 5-1, losing to, frankly, a bad Washington State team. So, it's kind of weird to say you're glad that your opponents win, but I was glad that if anyone's going to give them their first loss this year, that Georgia is the first person to have, Georgia still has that opportunity, to be the person to give them their first loss, and that it wasn't Washington State. But moving on a little bit with the other stats that I kind of compiled. So, as I mentioned, Ole Miss and Georgia both want to establish the run on offense. Ole Miss currently fifth in the SEC in rushing, averaging 204 yards a game. Georgia seventh at 186 yards per game. And then Ole Miss in the passing game is second in the SEC at 311 yards a game. Georgia is 11th at 229. So quite a disparity there between the two. And then as far as defense side goes, Ole Miss is currently 14th in run defense, averaging 158 yards allowed each game. Georgia is 6th now, averaging 92 yards per game allowed after giving up decent amount, over 100 yards, close to 150 to Auburn last week. Kind of bumped our numbers up a good bit there on average. But on the passing side of the ball, on defense, Ole Miss is currently 5th in the SEC, allowing just 180 yards per game, and Georgia is 11th, averaging 216. So these stats are, take them for what they are. Obviously, competition is what it is at this point. Ole Miss's schedule is going to start to ramp up a little bit more. Like I said, they've been at home for 5 out of their first 6 games. First ever true road test for Trinidad Chambliss in the SEC, granted, right? He did play at Ferris State, but this is a little bit bigger stage and a lot more at stake for him. So, other stats that I kind of noticed were, as far as like sacks against the team, both the teams are pretty even there. Ole Miss has given up 7, Georgia's given up 8, and sacks 4. Ole Miss has got 9, Georgia's got 8. So this game has the potential of being a little bit higher scoring and getting over that 55.5 point mark. Obviously those guys in Vegas know something. They don't get too many things wrong along the way each year. But what Georgia wants to do is kind of have that death march at some point during each game to kind of either take the lead at the end and not leave much time for the other team, or to kind of make one last march with the lead to hold the ball and get one last score to go up by a couple of scores and kind of salt it away. And so that right there is just going to kind of take some of the possessions out of play for the game for each team. So less chances to put points on the board. And the other part about it too, a lot of the drives that teams have scored on Georgia have been long drives as well, 12, 13, 14 play drives. And so again, eating a lot of clock, taking away the number of possessions that each team has. So that's why I personally see this game getting, probably around the same amount of points that Georgia scored on the year, and Ole Miss as well. So, but kind of looking at specific guys for Ole Miss on the defensive side of the ball, the pressure that they do get when they kind of get home to the quarterback is kind of coming from the middle of that defensive line for them. Their defensive tackles, Eccles and Harris. I think they each have 2 sacks on the year, and that kind of plays into Georgia's offensive line strength. Now, to that point, we're still missing 3 tackles, but where our strength kind of is on that line is at the center position and the guard position with Bobo and Morris. So, hopefully we can kind of contain those 2 guys. Now they do have that Human Myelin on the end there, who's got a couple of sacks, the transfer that came in last year from Florida. So, he hates Georgia. But, I think Freeling will probably play again. He wasn't supposed to play last week. And then when Gaston went down again for us, Monroe said, put me in, and ended up being, I think, offensive lineman of the week. So, pretty incredible, but, largely documented. We've talked about it a lot, the injuries on this offensive line. We've had 6 games. We've had 6 different starting rotations on the offensive line. So just no real continuity. I guess the good part about that is a lot of guys are getting some reps. So live action can only help. But hopefully we'll get, Freeling ready to go, and one of the 2, whether it's Gaston or Green, ready enough to contribute in some way, shape, or form this week. But kind of like what they like to do on defense as far as getting after the quarterback, kind of in the middle part of their defensive line, plays into our strong suit on our offensive line. Now, as I mentioned, not sure how many 3, 4, maybe even 5 wide sets Ole Miss may run against Georgia, but it's going to be a lot for our DBs to keep up with. And so kind of looking at, in my mind, who do I think is going to be like the X factor on defense for Georgia, I think it's got to be a linebacker. That's where the pressure that we've gotten on the quarterback has come from, is the linebacker position. Obviously, last week, C.J. Allen had a huge game for us. Chris Cole has been big for us for most of the year. He didn't really, set the world on fire last week. But I think if I had to pick someone on defense to be the X factor for Georgia this week, because you're going to have to spy on Trinidad Chambliss and bottle him up, make him uncomfortable, whether you get to him or not. You got to, collapse that pocket. You got to find ways to affect his decision-making, speed his clock up, maybe, get him into some long, 3rd and long situations. I know that's, most teams have about 100% 3rd down conversion percentage on us in the first quarter. If we can somehow limit that to 50 50%, that would be great. And getting someone in 3rd and long is only going to improve your chances at getting off the field on 3rd down. So I think if I'm going to pick a defensive X factor for Georgia, sorry, you probably hear my dog in the background, but if I'm going to pick a defensive kind of X factor for Georgia this week, I'm going to go with Raylan Wilson. This guy, he's just speed and just hits with physicality and gets after it. Could see him being someone that's kind of tasked with just sticking on Chambliss as best as he can all game. So a defensive X factor for Georgia this week is going to be Raylan Wilson. Offensive X factor, I know Chauncey Bowens has kind of come on and kind of been the guy for us so far here lately at the running back position. Now I know Nate Frazier did end up starting again against Auburn, but Bowens is also kind of dealing with a little bit of an injury, kind of cropped up on him a little bit in that Auburn game. So that's why they kind of leaned heavily on Frazier. So my X factor, because we do want to get the ground game running strong for us and keep that going all game. So I'm going to stick on the running back side, but I'm going to go with Frazier this week just because, I still think that he is, as far as ceiling goes, probably the better of the 2 running backs as far as, just catching the ball out of the backfield and just a little bit more option as far as, being able to make guys miss in the open field and just kind of shiftiness. So I like for Frazier to have a big game for us. It almost seems like against Ole Miss we can maybe name our number on rushing and hopefully get over 200 yards rushing and kind of have our way on the ground. So I think that'll be the plan anyway. So I think Frazier's going to be a big part of that. I almost went with an offensive lineman, honestly, but it's just more fun to go with a skill guy. So, and it's kind of sounds a little bit like a cop-out, but as far as looking at who Georgia's going to have to stop on Ole Miss, it's got to be Chambliss, right? I mean, not many teams have done a very good job of bottling him up, and we've got to find ways. Those linebackers are going to have to be flying all over the field, spying and being sure tacklers, getting guys down to the ground quickly after they catch passes, that kind of thing. And they're going to have to. The linebackers are going to have to play coverage pretty good bit. So I don't see a lot of sacks either side coming into this. Going into this game, neither team has very many. I don't see there being a sudden influx in them during the game, which probably means both teams each have 5 sacks. But if we have 5 sacks in this game, then I'll be happy. So, but just getting to Chambliss and, like I said, rattling him, that's going to be key. And I don't expect this to be a blowout one way or the other. I think Kiffin and Smart have a long history working together. They know each other really well. It's going to be a little bit of a chess game. Ole Miss likes to kind of get to the line pretty quick and kind of see what the defense is doing and like communicate in the headset, with the quarterback, what they're seeing and what they need to check out of, or, where the look is or a hot route that they might need to call. So you'll probably see a lot of what looks like Ole Miss going, quick, but it's really just them getting up there really quick to kind of see what defense Georgia gets in. So it'll be a little bit of a chess game between Lane and Smart, and obviously they've done that, with each other for many years now, as co-coaches and against one another too. So this game, like I said, I could see it, coming down to, a stop at the end. with a team ahead, but needing to keep the other one out of the end zone. I also see something weird kind of happening, something along the lines of maybe like a missed extra point, someone being forced to go for two at some point just to try to tie it or get it within, touchdown or field goal range, and whether they get it or not, I don't know. Kind of a more odd score than you normally see, like a traditional 20-17 or something like that. Safety happening, a block punt, fake of some sort, trick play. I kind of see, one or two little crazy things like that happening in this game. And, if I, was told to predict this game, if I was like a Vegas insider and they're wanting to know what I think the outcome's going to be, my prediction for this game, just kind of thinking about everything and, looking at what Ole Miss has done against the competition they've played so far and what Georgia's done against the competition they've played, and kind of what our strengths are, as opposed to their weaknesses, and kind of how they play into each other. I do have Georgia coming out on top. Again, I almost wanted to just say Ole Miss no matter what, but I do think we sit in a spot where we have a little bit more on the line, and the atmosphere, while it's not a night game, is going to be crazy, and it's going to be a lot different than what Chambliss has had to deal with before. And I do think we can rattle him there at times, and get off the field in some long, tough situations for Chambliss. So in the end, I see Georgia coming out on top in this one. Again, kind of a strange score, but I'm going to go Georgia 26, Ole Miss 20. So that would actually not be a cover for Georgia and give you an under on the over-under. So again, got Georgia coming out on top, 26-20 on Saturday. Let us know what you think. Comment, like, share this video out. Engage with us. Love to have that back and forth. And we'll see how right I am on Saturday. I'm going to go let my dog out before he has an accident. Talk to y'all later. Go Dogs.